And I took this crazy leap of faith because a very dear friend of mine who's a brilliant psychiatrist, Dr. Stacy Cohen, reached out to me. She goes, I'm opening this boutique practice. You've got to come do what you do with me. You have to be there. And I was like, oh, that's really scary. And, you know, my measly salary that I was like scraping to get by on somehow, right? Gave me some sense of security. And on that note, my mom was a real trailblazer when women weren't trailblazing. And she'd always said to me that I could do anything I wanted to do. And she was an example to me. And when I was about 12 years old, she left kind of a mediocre secretarial job, which was like the role that she was told she was appropriate for because of her level of education and being a woman. And she went back to school. And she, you know, left this dead-end job and, you know, became a chiropractor and sports medicine. And so, like, that was my example, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I was offered this opportunity with Stacy, I reached out to my mom and I was like, no. And she's like, Ashlee, I get it. It's a leap of faith. It's scary. But I know you're going to land on your feet. I know you're going to be successful because you always have been at anything you put your heart into. And I also know this, that once you take that leap of faith, you're going to wonder why you waited so long.
Welcome to the Fifi Uncensored podcast, episode 114, part 1, with my guest, Ashlee Petersen. And forgive me for my gravelly voice. I'm so excited to share this episode with you. Ashlee and I connected in Hollywood as professional makeup artists, and she has since taken her career and pivoted with a willingness to step into her purpose as a substance abuse and recovery counselor. And the life experiences we've shared and the conversation that we ensued and the connection that we have and the friendship that has endured is something worth sitting down and taking a listen. So with that said, grab that coffee and grab that cannoli because here we go.
Hi, beautiful. Aww.
So exciting.
Exciting. I'm recording, so we're just going to kick into like, hi, Ashlee Petersen. Like, it's been forever.
Oh, my God. I know, I'm a little emotional.
So crazy. I mean, I was trying to think when we last saw each other. And honestly, I'm going to tell you, for me personally, the only memory that comes to my mind is the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Was that the Makeup and Hair Awards? What were we doing there?
No, you were in recovery.
Oh, God, that's right.
Swear to God, I feel like that's the last time I saw you. And it's like, is that possible? If so, what year was that?
Well, was it the...
What year did you guys get married? What? I'm sorry.
Okay. I got sober in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been almost 13 years for me now. It'll be 13 years in February. When did I get married?
When did you guys get married? You and Jason, when did you guys get married?
Jason and I got married in 99 or 2099.
I thought it had it, so I was like, okay, I'm landing on 96, but that's too early. Where is it early? And then I was like, 99 makes total sense. Makes total sense. So honestly, I feel like you and I haven't seen each other for like 2 decades.
Forever, I know. But you know what? We haven't seen each other in a more organic sense if Zoom is our new normal.
Yeah.
But I think because we follow each other on social media, there's aspects of both of our journey that we feel like we've been part of. Yeah.
The beautiful thing about this platform that I speak on all the time, I just got off with my trainer. The key core group of my support system, my community that most insulated, literally, Ashlee, I have met in less than 4 years who are like my tribe within the tribes of the tribes of the tribes. Yeah. It's the craziest thing, and they are all met on social media. Yeah. And that is a huge thing, but going back to what you're saying is I agree with you. Just because we haven't organically seen each other all these years in person, hug, kiss that way, I know we're hugging and kissing virtually in a way that I think is super important for people to hear, because I think if people aren't, first off, hello, I love you. I'm so happy to see you. I'm so grateful we can do this way. How powerful that we can stay connected in this way, and that you and I, through our journeys, have been showing the power of the willingness to not get stuck, the willingness to be in a flow, the willingness to listen and learn, the willingness to grow and expand, the willingness to do it gently, but with a purpose and a passion. And I want to delve deeply into some of those things, but I think that there's so many parallels in our stories. This is why I do this platform, because I want to take all the stories that people have said you've got to make into books and combine it with other people's stories and what they've done to overcome and create success. And that it just one time isn't sometimes enough for all of us. We do it multiple times. And to that point, like, I think, and you know this as well as I do, and why I wanted to have you on here for so many reasons. You are the epitome of, yes, I was known for doing this. And then, yes, I took a pivot in my life, and now I'm doing this. And it's really interesting from the community that we spawned from, that how we connect. Who can really do that, even though we're in this very pivotal industry, but who can do that in a bigger way and lands on their feet and does it so beautifully and gracefully, i.e. yourself, and be the example of what is possible. And that you don't have to stay in this if that's not serving you or doing what you're here to do, or that was then and now this is now. So I want to just say, first off, hello, I love you.
I love you too.
And so we must have met, Ashlee, I got into the union in 96. So we met somewhere between 96 and 99 when you got married.
But I think we actually may have done some non-union stuff together too.
Did we? Because I moved in 92. So that's possible. And you may have a better memory than I in that regards. Because I was trying to think, how did we? So what do you remember?
So, obviously my memory is often clouded because from a lot of my career, I wasn't sober, and it's embarrassing to me. But I think that, did we meet on 90210?
Yes.
Before I got married to Jason, right? I was a makeup artist. I was a new mom because my son was born in 94. Or maybe I wasn't even pregnant yet. Maybe I was pregnant or I wasn't pregnant yet. But that, I think, is where we met. It's on the 902, because Donna, may her memory be a blessing, brought me in to that show. And that's where I met a lot of people, although I wasn't union yet. And because they were doing double ups.
Yes.
Yes. So, I do remember that.
It had
and
to
so
have
I
been
think,
96, Ashlee. Can I just interject for a second? I just want to interject
sure.
that for a second because I say that because I know what's going on my timeline. And, I don't want you to be embarrassed because I don't sit here in judgment of anything, who and what and where you were in the moment. Because Ashlee, at the very same time you were experiencing that I know people judge me for, but for why? I was in the middle of domestic violence.
Yes, you know what? I remember us connecting in that place.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And
talk about two women that had journeys, right?
Why do you think I wanted you here?
Yeah.
I think it's so powerful. You and I could sit here in silence and just represent what's possible. If people
on so many levels, there's so many reasons why we shouldn't be sitting here. We shouldn't be alive. Correct. We shouldn't be healthy. We shouldn't be thriving, succeeding, positive, trying to encourage and motivate other people, right? There's so many reasons why the cards were stacked against us, but we persevered.
100%. Everything you just stated is exactly what I speak on, you clearly speak on, and what people would need to be always reminded of. I mean, I say it's like quantum physics. Look, you and I did not ask for all this stuff. We didn't ask to go through all these evolutions. And yet, here we are as inspiration teachers. And I say that with humility. I don't say that like, oh, look at us. No, you and I both know that this has not been a road that most would choose, or any would choose, or we would choose for anybody else. The gift, though, is we are the example of what is possible, that you do keep getting up, that you do keep persevering, that it does take willpower, that it does take making a decision to say, no longer am I going to be doing it this way. Or, I mean, I know in this last year, I didn't have control over ovarian cancer, but I was going to do my best to show up and do my part. And it started with my mindset. And everything you stated, right? Go ahead.
No, I was just like, I watched your journey because you bravely documented it. And from the very beginning, like, it was your mindset. You were so positive. Your outlook on all of it was like, and I will persevere. And that may be intrinsically part of your personality and who you've always been. But I believe that those other experiences that we had to persevere through earlier in our lives prepare us for those moments where we really have to show up and go, am I going to lay down or am I going to stand up and fight? And if I stand up and fight, am I going to be positive? Am I going to have, the possibilities are limitless kind of outlook? Or am I just going to be, negative through the entire experience? And you were positive. I watched it and I was scared for you.
Thanks, honey.
But here you are.
It's surreal. It's surreal to be sitting here days before my 1-year anniversary of my diagnosis.
Wow.
Literally after 4 months that I had been misdiagnosed and was speaking up continuously in doctors' offices saying, no, something's not right. And when I went public, which was super, super scary, and I've said this before, it was super scary. And it's one of those things, like, my husband's not on social media. And as I saw the power of my And when I say power, I don't mean like, oh, I'm so powerful. No, the power of how it caused so much effect in helping others because of my vulnerability and my willingness.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, there's plenty of me's out there who have done this very thing, that it wasn't my plan to do this thing. What had been said to me was document yourself, because you never know what is going to come of it, not with an intention of producing something, with an intention of just being able to see like this growth, this arc. It's shocking to me. If I hadn't documented it, I would have forgotten, not because I'd forget, but the brain activity is like this.
Oh, yeah.
We've already changed, like this, change. So what we remember is fleeting. So to document was really powerful. And in that moment that I went public was, again, not intentional. I was literally doing what my trainer had said. Just document your feelings, document moments, whatever you do. And I didn't have a plan. I just was like, oh yeah, okay, I heard it. And then there I was in the hospital going, I just want to record how I feel right now. I wasn't going live. I wasn't. But my point to that is that I didn't know how this was going to turn out. I knew that I was having to make huge life decisions. And I knew, like you said, that all the things that led to that moment gave me the strength to know that I knew how. Strangely, Ashlee, I feel very fearless in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't explain it, but I think it's because it's so aligned with who I am. Like, no, I'm not asking for more medical issues. No, zero, boom, done. Like, I'm ready to like just be like for the next 30, 40 years, however long I'm meant to be here, like, you know, healthy, you know. And it's not that I'm not healthy. Thank God I was so healthy leading up to my diagnosis. That was the other, like, couldn't have predicted that. Couldn't have predicted that. But because of all of those things, that snowball effect, to your point, was what gave me the mind. I was already in that mindset. I was already in that, like, all right, let's do this. And then, yeah, I didn't know the impact of how it was going to affect people like yourself. And I didn't know the power of that conversation that threaded along. And what it's now caused me to realize, like, what I want to be doing with, you know, regards to who I already am and what I want to add to that and how do I want to, you know, make that happen. But I look to somebody like yourself and go, look at this woman. Look at Ashlee Petersen, who when I met was at 90210 as makeup artists, as peers, who connected, who you and I, because of what we were both experiencing, I'm shocked what I do remember. And I do know it was 96 because I do remember, although 96 doesn't sound right, 98 feels more right. But I think, like you said, we could have done independent stuff. I feel like it was 98 that, I don't know what, no, it had to be 96 we met each other, because that's when I did 90210. I know it. I know it because that's when I met some other people that I remember the year. So you and I had to have met around then. And if you weren't sober and I was going through domestic violence, we were both in the same brainwaves. And the truth is, because you're in a fog. I'm going to speak for myself. I was in a fog. Thank God for you and me to be sharp individuals even through the fog, because those were our survival mechanisms.
I vaguely remember, you know, as I said, my memories, but I'm like, as we're talking about this and that period, like, I vaguely have a memory of you needing to get out of a place. Were you
5 times? I mean, I had to move 6 times in 5 years.
Yeah, I remember that going on when we were together. And, you know, at the time, I mean, now in the work I do today, I have women that come into my life that are experiencing, domestic violence, or, even just sort of, that kind of, I know it's really gotten overused lately, but it's appropriate here, that sort of narcissistic,
Oh yeah,
gaslighting, mind control thing going on.
That's all it is. It's sociopath and narcissism. Repeat, and rinse, repeat and rinse.
Yeah. And, I see it through a different lens.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of the education I've since gone and received since I left the film industry, but also because it's just through a more mature lens. Like, I can see, like, oh yeah, this may not have happened to me directly, but it's happened to plenty of people in my life and around me, and most certainly it could have been me.
Oh yeah, any one of us. And that's what's so unbelievable, while you're not being believed.
Yeah.
Layered. Why so many women die, because they're not being believed and heard, seen and heard. Well, no matter who and where you come from, like you said, coming from a mature, or coming from a place of, now you're in a therapist hat mode, where people are coming to you. So they're coming to you with a package deal of layered cake of circumstances that led them to you. And being somebody who's now been out of that and was in that in between two marriages, ironically, strangely, but that's where a lot of you guys met me initially, in the union world. And so that's what I was known for, I think, to many, weirdly, because that's not who I was in Felicia world. But yet I know I was in big time Survivor world. And I know that though I didn't want it to be public, and I never missed a day of work, and I never didn't deliver, and all those things, like I was on super overachiever mode. It was ridiculous, while trying to stay alive and keep 3 dogs together and keep shelter over my head.
I remember there being animals involved. I remember there's like little bits and pieces that are coming back to me about it. It's well, because God forbid, right? God forbid you miss a day of work, and then they can say, oh, look, not only was she a victim of abuse, but she also can't show up for work.
Correct. And think about
poor thing.
Oh, poor thing. And think about this, Ashlee. So that was between 94 and 98.
Mm-hmm.
I got into the union officially January of 96 because of Mad TV. But I moved here in 92, married to my first husband, didn't see myself getting divorced. But a year and a half later, I was choosing to walk out after 7 years. Walked into this unfortunate dynamic that I went in and out of for 5 years. I mean, I tried to get away with it in the first 4 months. The first 4 months, I tried to get away. So I wasn't like, head under a rock.
Right.
But once you're in that web, it is no easy feat. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how strong you are. And this is like, again, I would never, and you talk about the maturation or the education, I can guarantee you, if I did not have this under my belt, which I did not choose to have, but here it is, and the why. So I could educate, like yourself, I could educate from a perspective of experience and authority. Not because I want to sit in that space, but I can say, or, this is why women die. This is why, domestic violence is like domestic terrorism. It all starts behind closed doors and then spreads out into the world. Like, this is the stuff that our world is based on, this ultra violence and incapacity to communicate and get in touch with one's emotions. And we keep repeating and repeating and repeating, and we're not breaking the situation. And we're now birthing all this narcissism on top of it. So it's becoming so, I don't know if it's because we're connected through social media. I don't know if it's more willing, but imagine I was going through that between 94 and 98. How much time? 25 to 30 years have passed.
Yeah.
That is huge. And look at it today, how little is shifted.
Oh, please. I mean, yeah, it's still, we're still in like prehistoric times, which is mind blowing. It's mind blowing to me.
It's mind blowing to me. Go ahead, honey.
No, I feel like when you have sort of faced that dark night of the soul, which whatever that is,
it's a great way of putting it. It's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, it's there is some responsibility that we hold to basically guide, help, educate, people who are where we were. And that, I mean, when I finally got sober in 2011, it was not for a lack of trying. I mean, there's so many failed attempts at sobriety before that. And it was also very shameful. And this was at a time in our business when nobody was talking about addiction. Nobody was talking about recovery. Nobody was talking about treatment. I remember my union insurance that I worked so hard to get. Do you know how many days of coverage you got for substance abuse treatment? 7 days.
I knew it was under a week. I don't know why.
I was like, are you shitting me? And that was lifetime. That wasn't like once a year you could go for 7 days. And so I was like secretly fighting this fight. My addiction was like, this was a horse injury that ruined my knee. I had to have a total knee reconstruction. They put me on pain meds, and I was incapacitated because of the surgery for a very long time. And then I realized, like, oh, these are really great for like emotional pain. Painkillers work better on emotional pain than they do physical pain. So it became this runaway train. So this was like pre-people talking about the opiate epidemic. Like that happened in my recovery.
Yeah.
And and then going from like the doctor stop prescribing, well, now I got to get and go to work. I'm a single mom. I'm addicted to something. What am I going to do? I'm going to other methods just to kind of, not because I was getting high, but because I was in survival mode. I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
But there was so much sort of stigma around it, right? So I go and get sober, and I realized one of the reasons I stayed, I think, for as long as I did in the industry was because I didn't have anything beyond a high school education. I started doing makeup at 17 and a half. No college. Nothing. I was like, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. So when I got sober and I was working with someone, I went to this wonderful Jewish nonprofit in Culver City called Beit Yeshuva. And so one of the, which means house of return, which is like so appropriately, and they had all these incredible resources. And I went and sat with this educational counselor. And I was like, I can't go back. And she's like, what do you mean? You are making $250,000 a year when $250,000 a year is like $1 million. Like, what do you mean you can't go back? It's like so fabulous and it's so exciting and it's so this. And I was like, it killed me. It was killing me slowly. Like I wasn't allowed to be sick. I wasn't allowed to be fragile. I wasn't allowed to take a day off to be a mom. I wasn't allowed to, I can't live. That does not support my recovery. So I went back to school and I started, I went to college for the first time. I was 41 years old, sitting in the West LA College night school, working during the day, because if there's one thing I did learn working in the film industry, it was work ethic. That was one thing I learned. I learned how to make it through an 18-hour day and still drive home and make it home in one piece. So I was like, okay, some of what I did must translate. And then as I started focusing on addiction, I realized oh my God, I want to show up for people, not just women, but for people in a way I wish someone had showed up for me. A safe space, shame-free. It's not a moratorium on who you are as a person. By the way, no one chooses in life to set out and be an alcoholic or drug addict. That is not a life goal.
No.
And so I realized one day, I was like, how do I make sense of this? And I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense to me now if I frame it like this. I went from fixing up the outside of people to fixing up the inside of people. And that was how I showed up for this stage of my life. And that's where I get paid to listen to people's problems now. When I was a makeup artist, they weren't paying me to listen to problems, but I was. So, it's been, that was a catalyst. This sort of pivot into this stage of my life was a catalyst for me as I was approaching 50 and I was sober and I was doing this job. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm turning 50. Is this it? And instead of it being like a crisis, it was not a midlife crisis. It was a midlife awakening. Mm. And I realized that I did not want to have any regrets. I did not want to get to the end of my life if I was cognizant of the fact that it was the end of my life. And I looked back at this stage of my life where I was financially capable and, making a living and sober and a good parent and showing up for life. If I looked back at this stage of my life, at the end of my life, and there was something that I wanted to do, but I didn't do it because I was too afraid, or I didn't think people would understand, would I regret it? And if the answer was yes, I did it. No regrets. I already had enough. I got stacks of them. So, that coupled with this new kind of career and, is where I am today, which is, it's not easy. It's not always fun, but I am 100% grateful for the life that I have built.
When you said right now, I'm just going to go back a few minutes. When you were talking about how the film industry taught you work ethic. And then, you're talking about an 18-hour day. And look, God knows how many 18-hour days we both have pulled. And I've still been very actively in the industry, whether doesn't matter, taking care of number one or designing a show or keying it or whatever. But it's interesting when you segued out of the industry within the last decade or so, the industry has shifted in its own way. And now it's gone through more shifts with the pandemic and now these strikes. And so, it's going to be very interesting to see how things shake out that way. But to your point, and look, you were very committed to the art and the business and successful at it, as I have been very committed to it. And it's very, it's interesting because, listening to you, it's like I came into it from a very different way. Here I was a lot of education under my belt already from the pre-med fine arts film, blah, 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 and wanted to be a director. And as a female, I was like, yeah, it's not happening. I had lots of school loans to pay back, like all the things we hear contemporary times. That, as far as I'm concerned, that was me back then. You know, nobody else was, and nobody was going to come save me. Nobody was going to give me a government break or a financial break, or I had to pay them back, which is why I went to beauty school. And it threw, I mean, talk about putting my family through the ringer and being like, you're doing what? And I was just trying to take all my skills, all my capable things, and put it into a framework, because I wasn't going to go out and get an accounting job, and the directing jobs weren't going to be handed to me. And I had responsibilities, and I had work ethic already because I watched two generations before me work 7 days a week at the businesses that they created. And I was already working for them at 14. So I had that ethic in me. The difference is the industry that I'm not going to speak for you, but I'm just going to say probably loved at the time you're doing it. And I've loved, does not make for space, generally speaking, for people to live a healthy, self-developed lifestyle.
Right.
Bam. And with that comes unhealthiness here, which resonates throughout. And I'm not saying just because you're in it, then you go through shit. No, everybody is going to have their own path, right? But I also know that these paths it's been really an interesting path combined with all that other stuff. So during my recovery, being in remission, I got my 30-year gold card.
Yeah, I saw that. How's that? How's that? I mean, is that really where, like, I'm looking at people like you get your 30-year cards, and I'm like, yeah, I guess, like, if I weren't in a time warp, that's about where we were in terms of being invested for that long. Absolutely. And you guys, and I already had several years back in Chicago. I had, been running my own studio, my own photo studio, and heading up movies there and doing fashion. So I know it's shocking. I'm like, I always go, how did that happen? And to that point, with all the like things that came about. Yeah.
And also what goes on in our industry that, most industries may never be able to get away with in the realm of what we've experienced or what can happen. Going back to whether it's therapy or narcissism or making healthy choices or just deciding to pivot or realizing that, through these life experiences, you want to create more to be a purpose. First off, it doesn't, whether it's been not easy, mindful, purposeful, whatever, I don't care if you make $2 or $2 billion. Like, there's always going to be something. Like, I don't think that there's any perfect road. Like, the word perfect's got to be removed from our dialogue. And I think that people have to realize that just even when you land and you get to a goal or a space or an achievement, there's always still more work right behind it. There's always still showing up right behind it. There's no easy, you could request the universe to provide you with ease, with grace, with all those, and be mindful and intentional. And life is going to have its series of pivots. So what do you do with that? And you and I are these perfect examples of having been faced with many life moments that we made decisions. It's interesting because I really didn't realize, Ashlee, until recently that because I would ask myself, because I didn't know, because we hadn't been in touch, I didn't know you had become a licensed therapist, which I thought was insane and incredible. And I don't even know if you knew like my pre-med background and stuff.
No,
I couldn't, yeah, I couldn't see it through because of money. So it was really heartbreaking. And then, and I've said this a few times on podcast interviews, but not because of hearing myself tell this story. But it was the year before the pandemic, when one of my doctors asked me to go back to med school. And I thought he was kidding me. My point to that is the sciences and helping people and healing people have always been a true core part of me. I've always been, since I was a little girl, that person who always wanted to help. And maybe to the point of putting too much before me and not enough on me. But not to be about me, but to how can my story help others, right? And then how do you do it with authority? You getting your license along with your life experiences gives you authority.
Right, right.
And you said, you were trying to figure out how do you make this meaningful? How do you take what you were taking from people, taking them from the outside in, and now healing them from the inside out? Like you, I've been on that path, especially with this last year that is presented. And I think what was interesting, going back to social media, how we started our whole conversation, if it weren't for, ironically, the pandemic, not, unfortunate things of circumstances, but again, it's how do you look at things? Do you look at things as half full or half empty? Right? This is how we heal. The pandemic to me was an opportunity to step into some messy pools of things I knew nothing about. And do it to the best of my ability, no different than what you've done, getting sober, becoming educated, getting your degree, becoming a licensed therapist, doing what you're doing with your horseback riding, and I want to hear more about that, and becoming now the president and recognizing for the things you're doing, and people are like, they're like turning the light back on you and going, well, look at what you compound efforts are doing. These are compound efforts. And I talk about the power of planting seeds. And I would imagine, Ashlee, before you became addicted to painkillers and went on that journey, and the why you went through that so you could now be on this other side and help others. Because like you said, you didn't ask to get hooked on painkillers. I didn't ask to go through domestic violence. I didn't ask to go through ovarian cancer. I didn't ask to see a few other things along the way, or you. But there it is for a reason. And you can choose how you look at it.
Right.
You are the victim or you are the victor, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I was literally thinking that as it left your mouth. Yeah, I mean, listen, one of my favorite, and just for the sake of your audience, I am not a licensed therapist. I'm a licensed drug and alcohol counselor and a case manager. So that gives me a different set of sort of ethical parameters. It gives me a certain amount of grace and leeway and freedom, in that I'm usually the person they call when there's a fire and they need to send someone into the burning building. And I do a lot of crisis management, and I do a lot of, and I know we've mentioned the pandemic a lot, and I think pivoting and learning how to pivot and not being afraid to do something different is a really important skill for people to have in life, because I think a lot of people stay stuck in their life out of fear of change and fear of the unknown. And because like, oh, well, that's kind of different, and I don't know what that is. And like this perception of what it's going to be versus like, what does it actually feel like to face fear, walk through it, get to the other side, experience grace, realize it wasn't nearly what you thought it was going to be. Life's actually better on the other side of it. How can you imagine if you'd stayed stuck in the fear? Right? So I don't know what you said that got me on that tangent. I apologize.
No. It's no. You're
The
talking about.
pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because I deal with a lot of people that struggle with active addiction and mental health crises, like I work a lot with families and individuals who are having some type of co-occurring disorders. So the pandemic was like I had just taken this huge leap of faith, right? Because I alluded to, like, I was looking at 50 and I was like, oh my God, is this my life? Like, I was in a relationship that I felt alone in.
Yeah.
I was financially beholden to him because I was staying stuck in a small job because that's what society told me I needed to do. It's like, you got to have that 9 to 5, and but I was stuck. I was stuck in every way. And I took this crazy leap of faith because a very dear friend of mine, who's a brilliant psychiatrist, Dr. Stacy Cohen, reached out to me. She goes, I'm opening this boutique practice. You've got to come do what you do with me. You have to be there. And I was like, oh, that's really scary. And, my measly salary that I was like scraping to get by on somehow, right, gave me some sense of security. And on that note, my mom was a real trailblazer when women weren't trailblazing. And she'd always said to me that I could do anything I wanted to do. And she was an example to me. And when I was about 12 years old, she left kind of a mediocre secretarial job, which was like the role that she was told she was appropriate for because of her level of education and being a woman. And she went back to school. And she, left this dead-end job and, became a chiropractor in sports medicine. And so, like, that was my example, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I was offered this opportunity with Stacy, I reached out to my mom and I was like, no. And she's like, Ashlee, I get it. It's a leap of faith. It's scary. But I know you're going to land on your feet. I know you're going to be successful because you always have been at anything you put your heart into. And I also know this, that once you take that leap of faith, you're going to wonder why you waited so long. Mm. And she was 100% right. And what happened was overnight, I tripled my income. It was on my own terms. I wasn't working for the man, being told like, oh, well, this is as high up on this ladder as you're ever going to get, right? And I love these two men I was working for. I love them. But I remember looking at them and going, this is my notice, and you guys are the last two people I will ever work for. And I say that with love. And I took this leap of faith, and it allowed me to save money to get out of this relationship, to move into my own house with our daughter. I got this ranch, and then the pandemic hit. I moved in on February 15th. I moved my horses onto the property March 5th, March 9th, my son's birthday. Everything shut down. And Stacy goes, oh, shit, now what are we going to do? We just opened this gorgeous office in Santa Monica across the street from Air One. And I was like, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to pivot. We're going to go into people's homes virtually, and we're going to help them through their crises. It's going to be okay. We're going to help them. We're going to give them a sense of connection. And that's what we ended up doing. And we watched people struggle through, people that were never alcoholics became alcoholics. People that had never used drugs were using drugs. People that were using drugs, their drug use escalated. People that had jobs lost their jobs. I mean, every possible scenario that you could have imagined. And, we were like, it's okay. We got you. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. And, that's the shit that are we allowed to cuss on this?
Yeah, totally. Please.
Okay.
Bring it.
That's the shit that the dark night of the soul prepares you for, is you're not really afraid of anything.
Nope.
What scares me is not growing. What scares me is not challenging myself. What scares me is not taking a risk. That's what scares me.
Amen. I couldn't agree with you more. I love that it's coming out of your mouth, because sometimes I think people are like, all right, already, we heard you. Let's hear from somebody else. And now, my dear friends, you're hearing it from somebody else.
Yeah.
Truth.
I mean,
truth.
it's I mean, and I always give people that scenario of like, okay, let's say this is, and I'll tell you, the catalyst to my horses was, we grew up with horses.
Mm-hmm.
My mom grew up on a ranch, a cattle ranch. It had always been part of our lives and our family culture. But I'd always heard my mom say, when I retire, I'm going to finally get a horse. When I retire, I'm finally going to get a horse. So she retires. They move to this beautiful little community at the base of Sequoia National Park. They've got 2 acres. I'm like mid to late 40s. And this was my jumping off point in my whole transitional phase, my awakening. I was like, Mom, oh my God, you got the house, you got 2 acres, you can get a horse, finally. She goes, what if I get hurt?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh shit, she delayed gratification.
Mm-hmm.
Now she feels like she can't do it for all these other reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that? And so it was like this perfect storm of seeing 50, that conversation with my mom, and I was like, fuck it. What do I have to lose?
Nothing.
What do I have to lose? Nothing.
Nothing. It's all an illusion anyhow, whether people realize it or not. All this stuff, none of this shit matters.
None of
You
this
can't take
shit
it with
matters.
you. You can't take it with you.
Hell?
All
Show
people
up,
remember.
Be present.
Be
Breathe
present.
in light.
Be present.
Beautiful. Breathe it in. Take it in. Right? Like it's, that post, that day that we connected, I was like, oh my God, I sat right where I am and I like went through all those things. I like checked the bank account. I like went through this whole thing and I was like, oh my God, like, this is really heavy. Like, this is like, I don't like who I am today. I don't like where I am. And this was my mindset, right? And then I got up, I walked outside, I opened the door, the sun rained in, it just shined in. It's just, I could feel it in. I could hear my horses, I could hear my chickens, and I was like, fuck it. None of that matters. None of it. No. This is what matters. Connection is what matters. Authentic relationships are what matter. Maybe if you're blessed enough to make a positive impact on another human being's life, that matters.
Right. 100%. And again, why this is so important, because I find that, people connect, but do they? And do they really sit down and have real conversations?
Right.
And go deep and like pull back a curtain? Not nearly enough. And need to be shown how, because I feel like we become so detached. Oh, baby.
Sorry, there's always going to be at least 1 or 20 animal interruptions in this house.
No. This is great, because the dogs normally like to be out here. I mean, this has been an evolution with my podcast over the 2 years of getting to a space that there isn't a dog barking or a cat climbing through the screen and trying to be professional and, honoring my guest time.
For that, people were showing up in pajamas. That's another silver lining to the pandemic. We normalized humanity.
Yeah.
We took our masks off.
We did. And still people didn't. So it's really interesting, because to your point, first off, to me, self-develop is everything. Self-development has always been everything. I've thankfully was raised in an environment where growing and expanding and learning and seeing and, couldn't get enough was my foundation, but in a way that I almost didn't even appreciate to the level. Not because I didn't appreciate, it was just, there was also a lot of other stuff going on from the time I was a young kid that was just about, again, being in survival mode. So with that said, and it wasn't like growing up with alcoholism, but my parents were they had their own, it was, between the two cultures and religions mixing in the late 50s, and then a combination of a lot of people pulling at them, and then they had their own tumultuous environmental dispositions. And I couldn't have been more than 3 when I probably was starting to take that in. And to that point where it's like, and then when my parents finally divorced after 20 years and we lost our family 3-generation business of women's ready to wear, and then my dad died all within 5 months, that was my first big trauma. And nobody had one of those 3 of the trifecta, let alone all 3. And so that was like the welcome to the world. And there were so many other drips before that. So to get to that, that was like the big pivot. But my point to it is all of these things, like you said, have added up to things that gives you the grace to make a decision of what do you do with this information. And I know that, like yourself, in these pivots of the willingness to want to expand, the desire to want to grow, getting stuck to me is like, you might as well say I've hung up my coat and I'm dying.
Oh my God. The worst,
like, what are you doing here, right? What are you doing here? Like, if you can't breathe into the next moment, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And I get that it's easy to get comfortable in wherever you are, maybe, but is it? And right. And it isn't the same, because as we talked about earlier in the conversation, it's already changed. Because guess what? The galaxy, that's the way the universe works. Do you think that those planets and stars have stayed in the same place since we last said our last hello? No, on the contrary, they're like bazillion miles away from where they were the last time we said this. Point being is that it is really interesting to observe humanity and to love humanity and to want better for humanity and to understand that we're all connected that way. And it's just a matter of, having the courage to, take these moments and step into them. It's interesting being in our industry because we both knew what success was like. We both knew what it was like to connect to great people. We both knew what it was like to create fun projects and all that. And that industry can also create a lot of abuse, can create a lot of your light, can create a lot of things that people have all experienced, and you either survive it or you don't.
When we were in the industry, there was no HR department.
No.
I mean, like, that's how prehistoric it was when we were there. If you had an issue, you likely had no place to go with it.
And I've seen people since do it, and there's still no support in their benefit. And ironically, during the pandemic, and actually during this last year, my most recent with my ovarian cancer journey, I was introduced to somebody who will remain nameless, and the studio will remain nameless. But we were connected because they had 4 or 5 cancers running through them at the time. And they had been a studio executive who was the head of HR of one of the majors. And I asked them after we had connected for some time, I said very, not innocently, like I didn't know what I was asking, but I said very just, may I ask you a question? And they were like, of course. I said, I'm just very curious, being on the side of the industry that I know to be on, and what side you were on. within the last decade or so, there's been this whole HR thing with, all the things, whether it's sexual abuse or stepping over the line or, whatever the case may be in the environment that we are all working in and where we came from versus what is now. Let me ask you a question. God forbid somebody has to come to you or their upper production, team or what have you that could lead to you. It's not for the sake of the individual, is it? It's for the sake of the studio. And isn't it for the sake of you really don't care as long as the studio is protected? They admitted yes. Only because they no longer are part of the system would they ever admit this.
Right.
Which is why they will remain nameless and why they will remain studio-less. But to hear them very point blank go, there's no desire. There's no investment in protecting a crew member in a moment like that. And I said, well, then that shit's got to stop. I was like, then you need to just stop pulling the wool over people's eyes.
Right. It's about covering their asses. It's not about
all about it.
Being there for the individual. Yeah.
And to that point, Ashlee, as a healer, both of us are healers, and I'll tell you more about what I think will be super cool to talk more about later. But if you can't get sober without doing an archaeological dig, right?
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't come out of domestic violence if you're lucky enough. And most women don't, by the way. Most women never get professional therapy. They never do a dig. They never take a look at how did this all happen and how did I get aligned with this narcissist and all the things so you don't repeat. But if you don't do an archaeological dig in a culture, i.e. like the entertainment industry, you're going to keep repeating.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you can't, nothing's going to change if nothing changes.
Nothing's going to change if nothing changes.
And it's any disordered behavior or unhealthy behavior it's usually a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Right.
It's not like getting sober off of drugs and alcohol is the easy part compared to the rest of the stuff you got to do to stay sober.
Right.
To break the cycle, to break out of unhealthy family system cycles, perpetuating unhealthy behaviors, right? And people, there's so many different ways that people can act out their traumas that are much more socially acceptable, like spending, like sex, like food, like those are pretty socially acceptable maladaptive behaviors, right?
Until it's no longer working for you. Yeah.
Yeah. It works until it stops working.
Thank you so much for joining us this week, and come back next week to hear part 2 with my conversation with Ashlee Petersen. In the meantime, join, subscribe, and continue to gather around the campfire with the Camp Fifi Uncensored podcast, where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and the life experiences are vast. Have a wonderful week. Much love. Bye for now.